Mason T. Miller is a source water protection specialist with the inventory and data management team in the drinking water special functions section. He has a bachelor's of science in agriculture economics resources from Texas A&M University. Mason has worked for TCEQ since 1999 as an environmental investigator, source water protection specialist, and in surface water treatment plant optimization. His duties include source water protection Texas Optimization Program, PDW Conference Director, and GPS Coordinator for the TCEQ. Ms. Wendy Lundeen has more than 24 years of experience in water, wastewater, civil, planning, design, and construction. She has worked on a range of projects, including water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, lift stations, water wells, aquifer storage and recovery, lead and copper rule revision, improvement compliance program management, biosolids master planning, small to large water and wastewater conveyance, stormwater and source water protection, and large diameter water lines in Texas, municipal wastewater programs in Louisiana and Texas, infrastructure, master planning, and technical interface management in West Africa and Southeast Asia. Wendy is a senior project manager and principal with CDM Smith in Houston, Texas, where she has been for the past 9 years. Please welcome Mason T. Miller and Wendy Lundeen.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. I hope everyone is having a good day at the conference. Here we are getting ready to wrap it up. We've already got a day and a half down, and we're going to get y'all to the break, and then after break, we'll wrap up the conference. But again, I come here every year to do the source water protection update. What I'm going to do is give a little quick overview of what all TCEQ is doing with the source water protection program, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lundeen to give us an update on what we've actually done with the source water protection and water security contract this fiscal year. So we'll talk about a little bit of best management practices during her presentation. I'm just going to go over an overview. So the history of the source water protection program is active since 1986 as a wellhead protection, and then we switched over in 96 to include surface water, so we started doing intake source water protection. So the EPA started with what they call the wellhead protection, and then it just kind of expanded from there. Right now we're looking at about 1,004 source water protection participants, and it grows about 25 to 30 each year as we roll through water systems. So we're updating those continually. And Texas has over 7,000 public water systems. That is a lot of public water systems. And there's roughly about 4,700 community water systems in Texas. And so that's our primary focus is on community water systems. We're held accountable by EPA for community ones, but we also work with transients and with non-community as well, as we'll talk about some of those when we go through here. The populations, obviously a public water supply is 50 on a daily and monthly basis, and all the way up to 2.7 million population. So the program's implemented by TCEQ, and we have some other partners that we're going to look at. So this is the scatter graph of the source water protection participants that we've worked with since the inception of the program. And then the green dots represent the ones that we're working on this fiscal year. So our project areas this year, we were working down in the lower right there with Brazoria County and Harris County. We did 23 groundwater systems in that area. And then if you look to the left over here, kind of in the center, those dots represent the two green ones as the city of San Marcos. We did their groundwater wells. And then also as a surface water component this year, we worked with we did Lake Dunlap outside of New Braunfels, and we worked with Canyon Regional Water Authority and with the GBRA San Marcos. So we took care of that protection area there. And it's pretty significant because 2 years ago, we worked with Canyon Lake. We did the Canyon Lake project. And then last year, we did the New Braunfels water utilities on the same river channel. And then this year, we've worked with Lake Dunlap. So we've kind of worked our way down as a progressive surface water, source water protection program. So the parts of the Safe Drinking Water Act that relate to this program is we wanted to identify the public water supply areas and then delineate the boundaries of where the actual protection area needs to take place. All water comes from you know, everybody lives in a watershed, and then you've got an area of primary influence. And if you got a well, you've got nothing less than a quarter mile, but sometimes it expands out further. And that's, you wouldn't really call it, it's kind of like a cone of depression, like how's the water drawn? How far out is the water drawn for this aquifer that we're pumping the water out? So we never do less than a quarter mile. It can go up quite a bit more if you're dealing with Edwards and things like that. And then also, if we don't have any geology of that well, or the construction is what we usually miss. Sometimes we have wells that we don't know how deep the well is or how much screen interval it has, and so that can adjust the capture zone to up to a half a mile. The next thing we identify here is the inventory of potential sources of contaminations, which we call PSOCs, and those are the actual contaminants that are located within that capture zone area that we identify. That doesn't mean that there's a problem. That's why we call it potential. We would be looking for groundwater wells, gas stations, cemeteries, things of that nature that could be a potential source of contamination. And Ms. Lundeen will go over some of the things that we found this year in our project area. And then the last thing, we implement a source water protection program. So we can go through there and do an inventory of your groundwater protection area or your surface water protection area. But if the operator takes that book and just puts it on the bookshelf, that's not going to protect anything. So you have to implement the program. That brings in best management practices as well, or once you've identified a problem that could be a potential problem or that you know about, it's just something that you're aware of. I mean, and then you update that plan each year so that if you start having a problem with sampling or something like that, you can kind of look back and say, okay, I'm getting, effluent or fecal coliforms, things like that, and you'll look and you've got leaking septic systems really within 150 foot of your well, things like that. That's what we're talking about doing best management practices. So the major components, we do a program introduction and research, and that's where I call and beg you to participate in the program, okay? We get water systems to participate, and then we do the source water protection area. We identify these are the wells, this is the capture zones that we're going to be looking at, and then we actually do the source water protection inventory, and that's the boots on the ground. We get out there and we go door to door, property to property, looking for something that could be a potential source. And there are quite a few, several hundred potential sources, and so I'm not going to go through all of them here, but major ones are going to be your abandoned water wells, gas stations, failing septic systems, things of that nature. And then once you've got this inventory done, you do a contingency plan. So what if, let's say you have I-35, I-45 running within your capture zone, then you do the what ifs. What if a tanker load of fuel turns over? What if you have hazardous chemicals that have an accident within your capture zone? So what do you need to do to be prepared for that? And then we try to identify a best management practice that goes along with each and every potential source of contamination. Quick example is if you find an abandoned well, then you work with the property owner to either cap, plug, or bring the well up to standard so that it's not becoming a straw that bypasses the Earth's natural filtration process and then puts the contaminants right in your aquifer. Best management practices are the most effective pollution control practice, and implementation helps protect the source water and public health. And so we've talked about this a little bit, identify BMP for each PSOC, and we assist the public in better understanding. And what that entails is maybe labeling of a stormwater drain to let people know, hey, this stormwater drains to your lake. It may be putting a sign up outside of your protection area that says drinking water protection area, such as the sign here on the front of the podium. And so that's the kind of stuff that would be identifying and educating the public. Also, we have flyers and pamphlets and brochures that we deliver and distribute to the public to try to educate from the ground up. The contingency plan, TC provides examples. That would include emergency contacts. So if you do have a fuel tanker turnover, if you have I-35 running through there, then you need to have some sort of a contingency plan being, okay, if this happens, who do we call? You don't have time to be flipping through the yellow pages to find somebody that does fuel cleanup. You need to have somebody that's ready to go. And so that's the stuff that we have. What about alternative sources? One of the things that we've done with the water system is they had 2 lakes, but one lake could only get to their water treatment plant by dumping it into the other lake. So one of the things that we did, which is one of the simpler things, but one of the best plans I've ever had, was we need to put in a bypass valve here, so if this lake gets contaminated from I-35, which is a legitimate, that's not made up, how do we get the water from the other lake to the water treatment plant? Because if you're just dumping your raw water back in with where the leak already is, you're not getting anywhere, and that's something nobody had thought about. And so that's one that we're really proud of. So alternative sources, interconnections, things like that. If this well goes out because of a problem, do you have a neighboring water system that we can all interconnect with? The conclusions is we want every system to have a source water protection plan, and we'll make them easy to accomplish. You know, they did get to where they were really thick, lots of information, but some of the information was dated. So we've taken the information that changes, meaning like we used to put the last inspection results in there. Well, that was only good for 6 months to a year. We don't include that anymore. We only include the relevant, pertinent information for that water system on source water protection. We assist water systems in maintaining their program. We say it's a living document. It's a 3-ring binder. As companies and things move into the water system, into the capture zone, then identify those. Work with that new industry. Say, hey, just know that you're within this capture zone. You're within our water supply. You know, be mindful of that. If you have an issue, let us know. Don't try to cover it up. You know, clean it up. So it's working with the customers as well. And we want to assist the public in better understanding. And that's where, you know, putting a little note on your water bill or distributing the source water protection brochures at your billing office, it just kind of educates from the ground up. And I've started as young as second graders handing out the information, showing them the flow model, and the little kids saying, oh yeah, my dad, he just dumps that oil on the ground out back, stuff like that. So I said, well, talk to your dad about that. You know, this is not what we want to do. So you can actually educate the parent by starting with the children at the high school level. One of my water systems every year, the water superintendent, he goes to the high school earth science class and does a 45-minute presentation on source water protection, trying to get that information out there. So the next thing that we worked on, and Ms. Lundine's going to cover this more, I just want to mention that we did that this year. So our source water protection and water security contract is with CDM Smith Incorporated. That's the prime contractor. And they have subs with EJA and Associates, RJN subcontractors, and H2O partners. So they handle our source water protection and water security contract this year. And as part of that, we not only did the source water protection, I mentioned the 24 groundwater wells and the surface water protection area that we did this year. We also did some workshops. We did a cybersecurity workshop in Waco, and then we did 3 back to the basics workshops in San Antonio, Conroe, and Wiley. Another source water protection partner we have is Texas Rural Water Association. And it's a SWAP program sponsored by the USDA FSA. And they have several requirements that are not the same requirements that TCEQ requires. This is part of the federal, but you have to be a public water system, which is pretty straightforward, have at least 1 well or intake, have at least, I'll be willing to develop a steering committee, so they must have a group, and if you're working with the state park, they need to have the park rangers or all the park staff be as a steering committee. Be willing to implement at least 1 best management practice, and be willing to carry out public education. So they have usually field days where they can hand out stuff to, they have different groups of high schoolers or elementary kids that come out for field days to these state parks. I'm using that as an example, and they distribute flyers. They also have a flow model, and so for more information, and this is part of your reference material, you can contact Frank Hernandez. Another partnership that we've been working on is a Texas Forest and Service. It's implementing Texas Partnership for Forest and Water, and it's a relationship between forested watersheds and our water resources. Studies have shown that where you have forested source water protection areas, it actually filters the water out and makes a really pristine source water. And one of the things is that they're working with landowners to do sustainable harvesting. And for information on that, you can contact Hugh Simpson, and his information is at the bottom. And this is their flyer that they've been distributing. 60% of the Texans get their drinking water from forest lands. So it's very important to protect your forests and drinking water. Source water protection partnership we'll also have is we're doing implementation in Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, implementing source water in state parks. We're doing 1 a year, and we want to protect all state parks. We've completed plans for Guadalupe River State Park, Choke Canyon, Pedernales Falls, South Llano River, Garner State Park, and Lost Maples State Natural Area. And we've got some of the rangers in the room here today that started that little partnership. And so we'll be doing another one this fall, winter, to be determined. We don't know where we're going just yet, but we'll have that. My next slide here is the FMT program. This is one I put in here. We've had a lot of FMT. They're in the TA room over there if you want more information from them, but that's their information there. And that's mine, but I am going to move over and let Ms. Lundeen take it from here.
Thank you, Mason. And again, thank you all for sticking around for the full day. There's still a lot of good information being provided at the conference, not only in this room, but in others as well. So I do appreciate you guys sticking around. My name is Wendy Lundeen. I work for CDM Smith, and I also work for Mason on the Source Water Protection and Security project. As Mason mentioned earlier, or touched on, there's two main parts to this program. One of them is the source water protection, where we go ahead and work with the different public water systems that Mason has identified. What you see here is just kind of a quick overview of what that process looks like once you agree to sign on to it. This year, we had several groundwater systems and a surface water system that participated. I see some of you in the room there in the back, and I just wanted to go ahead and thank everyone for agreeing to be proactive and to get involved and to work with us. This year we had Aqua working with their groundwater systems in Brazoria County. New to the program was Aggregate Water Systems. They actually came to this very presentation last year, engaged with Mason and myself and signed up, and so we were able to work with them this year to assess 6 of their public water systems. And then also, not necessarily new this year, but definitely more expanded, Texas Water Utilities, which is based here in Austin as well, working with them on 5 systems in Harris County as well. Mason mentioned we also did Lake Dunlap surface water system, and along with that, San Marcos, who is one of the customers for the water that comes out of Lake Dunlap. They actually do treat some of that surface water. So again, thank you to all of the systems that participated and signed up. It just shows how you're being proactive will help protect your communities and protect your source water. The other thing that we do as part of this program is as part of the security process, this year we did some training sessions. So the first one we did was a cybersecurity tabletop and workshop up in Waco. So this was a 3-hour session where members of DIR, or the Department of Information Resources, came and gave a very high-level overview, followed by an in-depth overview, and then worked with the systems to have a tabletop exercise where they sort of went through different potential scenarios of cybersecurity events and how those systems could respond to it. One of my favorite feedbacks from it was, if your system is taken over by an external threat and you get hacked, do you know how to operate your system manually? Right? A lot of systems did, but some of the systems in the room didn't. And so I think that was just a really good takeaway, that if your SCADA goes down and is no longer yours to control, can you still operate safely? So a lot of good takeaways from that workshop. I think it was very successful, and hopefully we'll be able to maybe do something like that again in the future. Again, if that is something you're interested, you can also reach out to DIR. They presented here earlier this week, but they do help systems with cybersecurity exercises like that. In addition, we also held a 3 series of workshops called Back to the Basics, similar to what we see today. I don't know if you have your little TCEQ enamel pin, but this is also a Back to the Basics, I guess, culmination. So this year we were in San Antonio, Conroe, and Wiley, and got great participation in all of those different workshops. Again, we had a 1-hour cybersecurity overview, so really just kind of providing that introduction to all the different systems that were there, and then looking at kind of some of the different risks that are out there. So one of them being supply chain risk management, and then as well as workforce and site safety. I just also want to take this opportunity to thank all of the people who participated and presented that information. So not only DIR, but we also had CISA, the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency, and then professors from the Sam Houston State University. In case you missed it, or in case there were sessions today, you can go to the TCEQ website. On there, they have a YouTube channel. So any TCEQ page you're on, whether it's public notification, source water protection, even the air quality site, whatever you're in there for, if you scroll to the bottom, they have a link to the TCEQ YouTube page. If you click on that link, there is a search bar. If you are interested in checking out our cybersecurity tabletop, you can go ahead and enter it in there. I checked as of last night, it hadn't quite been loaded yet. They were still doing some final editing and then making sure that it was closed captioned appropriately. So we're getting ready to load that, I think probably any day now. Additionally, if you are interested in the back to the basics, maybe a little bit more on that supply chain risk management, which I think is was a really, really great session that had a lot of value as well, you can go in and search for Back to the Basics. In addition to these workshops, the previous workshops are also available online, and then all of this PDW conference will be available as a box set, if you will. So now I want to go ahead and talk about really the bulk of the program and what we do to help public water systems by delving into sort of the process that we use for our source water protection. Once you sign up, there will be 5 main phases of engagement. So the first one is when you agree, Mason then reaches out to me and we coordinate. And he provides us with some desktop data, and we do some online research. So this is going to come from many different sources, but really it's just kind of like, what can we do in advance? So that way, when we come together for this second one, which is the project initiation meeting, how can we be prepared to really have a meaningful discussion on what this program will look like specifically for that public water system? Once we have that meeting, we then move to the field where we do field investigations. And then from there, we take our results and generate a report. And so this is that 3-ring binder that Mason had mentioned that we provide. Again, 3-ring binder because it's a living document. It's not meant to stay on the shelf. And that binder is delivered to you during our closeout meeting where we review the results. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into each one of those little boxes and provide you a little bit more detail on what that looks like and what you will get for your money. Speaking of money, this thing is entirely free for public water systems. It's funded by, it's basically funded by TCEQ and EPA, so this costs you nothing but time and your agreement to participate. So the first stage, once you agree to participate, we'll get data from TCEQ. They have a database of all the potential sources of contamination for the state of Texas. This is information, a lot of really good historical information. So we look at that to see what is it that the state has around your wells. But in addition to that, we also go out for what we call EDRs, or electronic data records. And what that is it's a centralized database search system that basically goes out and pulls potential sources of contamination from multiple different databases, federal databases, all sorts of registrations to try to see what other information is potential in the area that TCEQ doesn't have. Maybe it's new and hasn't been reported yet, or maybe it's something that has not typically been tracked, but is something that needs to be considered moving forward. In addition to that, so we go ahead, we get the database, we pull our EDRs, we plot all that in GIS and usually as well as Google Earth, and then we do a review of the aerial imagery just to see if there's something else that maybe didn't get caught by either of these databases. So this year, we found quite a few. So of the 22 main groundwater systems, and again, San Marcos, we lumped them in with the surface water because they had both groundwater and surface water, we located 641 PSOCs. So if you recall from earlier, PSOC is a potential source of contamination. Of those 641, we had 57 different types. You can see over here on the right, there's a list of kind of the most likely or the number of hits that we had for each one. I will say we are still finalizing the last of the reports, so there may be some final tweaks, but this really just gives you a good idea of what the common potential sources of contamination are that we see in the field. Again, number 1 on the top of that list, and I think Mason touched on it briefly, is water wells. How is a water well a potential source? In and of itself, it's not, but it is a direct pathway to an aquifer. If it's close by, it's likely an aquifer that you share with that water well. So, when it's another system, maybe it's less of a risk, but when it's a private one, there are some things that can go wrong, that can impact your source water quality. And again, just finally, we reached into 5 different counties this year, covering a lot of ground in the state of Texas. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and go into some details on the different most common PSOCs. Like I said before, abandoned water wells or general water wells, active, abandoned, those are going to be the ones that we see most frequently. So sometimes it'll be another public water system that is fairly close by. In Northern Harris County, so I'm from Houston, Northern Harris County, we have a lot of small utility districts that are very close together. The way we grow, developer comes in, builds a neighborhood, drops a groundwater well, drops a little wastewater treatment plant, and then eventually that just gets swallowed up by the greater Houston area in the city of Houston. So, eventually maybe. So you have a lot of tiny little systems that are maybe serving single neighborhoods, and they can be pretty close together. In addition to that, there are a lot of private wells as well, pun intended. And those are the ones that generally can present a bit of a higher risk. Sometimes you will get property owners who don't know they have a well. Active wells are probably going to be less of a risk, but if it's an inactive well, say a home that's been converted to city water or public water system water, whoever that utility district is, what happened to that well? Is it still there? Has it been properly plugged and abandoned? Has someone run over it with a lawnmower and knocked the valve off the top? Is it an open hole? These ones have the potential to have a higher risk of allowing potential contaminants directly into your groundwater system. So scary stuff, but don't worry, there's best management practices, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. So moving on, another big one are auto repair, sales, salvage, towing, and tire sales. So a lot of different kind of contaminants that you can have here. Primarily waste oil, that's a big one. Everyone goes in and gets their oil changed. Someone gets in an accident. Oil is usually one of the first things that's going to be leaking on the ground, along with radiator fluid, right? So other contaminants or potential contaminants, hydraulic fluids, antifreeze, greases, lubricants, all of that stuff has the potential to mobilize if it's released from the vehicle. So things that can cause that to happen, so spills and leaks. So if you're storing them and you're not storing them properly, maybe they can, a container can get knocked over, or if it starts to degrade or gets damaged, it can leak. When performing maintenance activities, those things can get on the ground and then maybe trickle down into the groundwater. If you're dismantling cars, making repairs, or potentially installing new parts, all of those things are activities that can lead to these contaminants potentially making their way into your source water. Mason also mentioned petroleum storage tanks. So typically these are found in gas stations. Way back in the day, they used to be single wall tanks, right? Buried underground. Real hard to see what's going on, real hard to tell if they start to leak. We definitely had some issues. But now those hopefully all, have been replaced with double wall tanks, dual wall tanks, and are less likely to cause a problem. But there is potential for these historic soils and historic tanks to still be causing an issue. So just something to be aware of. Again, the potential contaminants that you can get here, hydrocarbons, gasoline, and other fuels. And primarily the way that these things can get into the groundwater is through leaks. But even with active facilities that are well maintained, you can still have issues during filling, right? Another one that's big, particularly in northern Houston, we didn't have a lot of this near Lake Dunlap, but our machine shops and metalworking, right? So again, some similar contaminants that you would see in the automotive industry. So greases, lubricants, metal shaving, and heavy metals, right? Lead solder, maybe? Anyone know about lead? Again, these are things that can find their way into the groundwater, especially if they're being left out on the ground, or in the surface water if they're able to flow away. Activities that can cause that to happen, maybe during the actual fabrication or disassembly, when making repairs to not only the thing that you're making, the widget that you're creating, or possibly when you're working on the equipment that helps to make that widget. And then again, just in general, spills and leaks. Another one, chemical storage. So this is a lot of what we kind of talked about earlier, but just specifically to chemicals, not necessarily related to a particular industry like automotives or machine work. Any kind of chemical, so you can have liquid chemicals, powders, pellets actually can cause problems. And these can come in, the potential contamination risk comes from a lot of different activities. Obviously things like spills and leaks, but then also, the application of that product, how is it being used? Is it being applied appropriately? Is it being applied at the right time, given weather conditions, and at the right levels and concentrations? Wastewater treatment plants and outfalls. I mentioned earlier, you have that small neighborhood, it gets a new well, usually gets a new little wastewater treatment plant, which then has its own outfall. So again, a lot of potential contaminants there that you would expect. So in addition to chemicals and liquids, if they have any kind of solids handling, processing, even just the removal of solids, that has the potential to spill out onto the ground or get into the groundwater. And then, of course, bacteria is going to be a big one coming from wastewater treatment plants. So again, activities, if there's an illicit discharge or they're exceeding their permit requirements, and then spills and leaks either from the chemicals that they're using or through the existing facilities when they start to get a little bit older. Speaking of sewage, on-site septic tanks or on-site sewage facilities are another potential source of contamination. These ones you see a lot more, particularly when you start to get into those more rural areas. Every home, will come into neighborhoods where they each have their own little septic tank and drain field. In and of themselves, when they're working great, they're working great. Potential contaminants could be nitrates or coliform, so similar to the wastewater treatment plant on that last point. But there's a lot of activities where these can go wrong and can really impact the groundwater. So, in addition to already being underground and being designed to sort of leach into the ground, things that can impact their ability to function properly, if they're not located correctly, maybe it's the type of soils that they're in, or if they're, installed incorrectly. If they've been designed poorly, if the construction was faulty, and they're not flowing the right direction, if they're not being operated correctly, and this is a big one where we see a lot, is if they're not being maintained. So, these facilities need to be checked regularly, and they need to be pumped out regularly to make sure that they are operating, as efficiently as they can. So that was a lot of potential sources of contamination. So let's move on to the meeting, which is kind of step 2. So these are all the things we look at beforehand. And once we have kind of processed that and identified some of those things early on based on our desktop review, we'll sit down with the public water system and talk about that, right? So in addition to doing introductions of myself and Mason and the team, we'll also talk about the program, give you a little bit more information on that, how it works, where it comes from. We'll talk about all those PSOCs that we found specific to the water system. So if you don't have septic tanks, we're not going to talk about septic tanks. We'll discuss the system and the wells because, the information that we get, which is provided by Mr. Abels over here, it's really good. It comes straight from the Drinking Water Watch database, but sometimes when a system submits new information, it takes a little while for that to then get uploaded into the system and processed. So we just want to make sure that what we have, the latest and greatest data we have is what's going on in the field. Also, sometimes if a system is planning a new well or they're in the middle of drilling a new well, we won't have that in the database yet. And so but we want to know about that so that we can include it as part of our assessment. And then finally, we'll go over kind of the project schedule, sort of what the next steps are, and just, the milestones and expectations on both sides. So from there, we'll go out and do our field verification and investigations. So really, it's going out and making sure, okay, are the things we saw in the TCQ database and in the EDRs, are they still there? Do they still present a risk, right? So we'll go through and we'll look at those. We go out, and I'll get into this in just a second, verify the location of those, we verify the location of the wells, and then we discuss with the operators about their contingency planning, right? So if there's an issue, what are you gonna do? The way that we do the verifications and the data collection, it's really using kind of a 1-2 punch. So we have tablets or iPads that we use that house the inventory that we found to date. So all that desktop information is in there and it's already pre-populated. So now when we go out, we just have to verify where it is. And we also carry GPS units. So that way, if we're like, oh, the outfall is at X and Y, we can go out, with our unit and say, okay, I'm at this outfall. It turns out it's 500 feet downstream of where we thought it was. So let's go ahead and update that information in the database. All of those updates then get reported back to TCEQ so that the information can constantly be improved. All right. One of the other things that we do that Mason had brought up earlier is we will, in addition to confirming and GPSing the well locations, some of these are quite old, were installed well before GPS was readily available and so easy to come by. So we'll verify those well locations and then hang a source water protection, drinking water protection area sign on each of the different wells. For the surface water systems, we also hang those around the intakes. That way, community members or people driving by can see them and know that it's just one more thing reinforcing that this is your drinking water, and so you should be careful. They are very desirable. People like to use them for target practice or take them home for their basements and their man caves. In addition to getting them provided to you, like for instance, if you have one well, we'll hang that sign. We'll also give you a backup, in addition to a template where if you continue to see people interested in your signs, you can go ahead and print more. Also, if you ask really nicely, Mason will probably give you a spare. So from there, once we've done all that, we move into developing the report. Broken down into 5 basic categories. We've got the introduction. We talk about the field inventory and the records research. And then we move into best management practices, which I'm going to detail quite a few of my favorites here in a little bit, just so you can get an idea. It's not all doom and gloom. We talk about that contingency planning, and then a general summary and recommendations. So section 1, again, this is just really to anyone who takes this book off the shelf. It gives them an idea of what the public water system is, how many wells are there. It just gives you a general background of the system and the program, so that way someone reading it knows what it is. Section 2 is really kind of the bulk, right? So this is talking about the different wellhead protection areas. So minimum quarter-mile radius. Some of them will be a little bit bigger if the well is old and we don't have information, or if we know that the water tends to move quickly underground in this area. Okay. Section 3 is the best management practices. So again, here's our sign. Just talking about that sign, but as well as other things that you can be doing. What are the recommended best management practices specific to the potential sources that we find in your system, right? So I'm going to go through a few examples here. My favorite one, and I think the one that is most cost effective and can be the most effective, is really business and community outreach. So just creating that awareness that this is a drinking water, this is where your water comes from, because a lot of people don't know that. Out of sight, out of mind. So, encouraging participation, improving cooperation, and just making sure that people know where their water comes from and what activities they do that can potentially impact that quality. So some examples are things like door hangers, mailers. We talked about going out to the schools and engaging with the children, right? So getting them on board at an early age so they can then take that with them as they grow up. There's a lot of really good ways to engage your community and make them aware. Some additional sources here, community hotlines, right? So there's the Don't Mess with Texas, which is a great one. There's a spill reporting hotline. So again, people out there, they're your eyes and ears. They can help you if something goes wrong, if there's an accident. They can use the spill reporting hotline and help you to become aware of potential issues early, right? So just making sure that they're all aware of that, as well as the EPA National Response Center. And some more easy things that you can do is just encouraging good housekeeping. So maintaining clean floors, dry floors. You don't want a lot of stuff on there that can maybe flow off either into your surface water or get onto the ground and then leach into the groundwater. Making sure that waste is properly disposed of on a regular basis. Train your employees. So if you're a business and you have staff, or making sure that they know what they should be doing in order to keep the place neat and tidy, and what those good housekeeping practices are. And then just having absorbent materials and on site in case of spills. EPA has a lot of really good resources as well. Some fact sheets that talk about different types of pollutants in facilities and what you can do there. So some more BMPs, again, so these are going to be real similar, so just making sure that they're aware of the things that they should be doing, they may not be. And then again, oil and gas, it's really about communication. So making sure they know they are in a source water protection area or and have the potential to impact drinking water quality, and that they should reach out if they have an issue. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to contingency planning. This is really important. We'll talk about some things that can be done working with the operator. A story that I really like to tell, and a good example, is just this last November in Houston, there was a train that derailed and spilled over into the river. And because City of Houston has such good communication, they were notified immediately and able to shut off the pumps for the intake for their East Water plant, which happens to be the one that gives me water. So again, there was no issue. It turned out not to be a problem, but because they had that communication set up in advance, they were able to take action quickly and avoid having to issue any kind of notices or have any impacts on their system. And then finally, the last section of the report will just be a summary. It'll give you some additional sources of information, including a link to the website, texasswap.org, where there's a form. If you're interested, you can sign up, as well as an email where you can get outreach. So again, we'll come to you at the end. We'll give you your notebook. You'll get a 3-ring binder. It's not meant to go on the shelf. You need to update it, right? Keep it alive. Inside of that, there'll be a thumb drive, which has everything electronically, including the database. So you'll be able to sort of have all that information readily available at your fingertips. It includes a nice big map that you can post on the wall. So as new industries move in, you can put a little dot on the map and know that you need to go ahead and reach out to them and engage. All right. So again, this has been a really great program. I do want to go ahead and thank all of our partners that we've been working with. So in addition to TCEQ, who has been great, has provided great leadership, Elston Johnson Associates, H2O Partners, and RJN. Without them, this whole thing, we wouldn't be able to provide the services that we do for the systems that sign up. And with that, are there any questions? I think we have 1 minute left, so if it's quick, we can take it. If not, Mason and I will be around just outside so we don't interrupt the next session.
We had a question from a virtual attendee. This came in during the first part of the session. What about Corps of Engineers, Parks and Lakes?
So I do know that Canyon Lake also is owned by the Corps of Engineers, or the Corps of Engineers has engagement with them. So when we work on lakes that they have jurisdiction over, we do include them as key stakeholders in our meetings. All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.